The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Cottonwood Springs as Nora Keller stumbled off the westbound train, her once fine dress torn at the hem, and a visible scar tracing from her temple to her cheek, a permanent reminder of the life she'd fled. It was 1878, and the frontier town of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, represented her last chance at disappearing from a past that clung to her like a burial shroud. Clutching her single valise with white-knuckled fingers, Nora moved through the small gathering of travelers, conscious of the whispers that followed her. The scar wasn't her only burden. In a town this size, word traveled faster than telegraph messages, and she knew her reputation, or rather, the distorted tales of it had likely preceded her arrival. "Miss Keller," a gruff voice pulled her attention from her worn boots. She lifted her gaze to find a silver-haired man in a dusty black suit. "Yes, that's me. Milton Hoffman, town banker. Your aunt wrote ahead about your situation." His eyes lingered on her scar before darting away. "Martha is waiting at the mercantile. She's offered you accommodation until you're settled." The hesitation in his voice told Nora everything she needed to know about how she'd be received in Cottonwood Springs. "Thank you, Mr. Hoffman." She kept her voice steady despite the hollowness in her stomach. As they walked down the town's main street, Nora felt eyes following her from storefronts and saloon windows. A group of women standing outside the millinery shop fell silent as she passed, their gazes a mix of curiosity and judgment. One whispered behind her gloved hand, and though Nora couldn't hear the words, she recognized the tone. She'd heard it in Philadelphia after the scandal after Edward. Her fingers unconsciously rose to trace the ridged scar on her face. Edward Blackstone's final gift to her before she'd fled east to west, desperate for anonymity. The mercantile occupied a large corner building with wide windows and a freshly painted sign. Inside, a plump woman with graying auburn hair pinned severely at her nape approached with quick steps. "Nora, my dear, you've arrived at last." Aunt Martha's embrace was stiff, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You must be exhausted from your journey." "It was long," Nora admitted, "but necessary." "Yes, well," Martha's gaze, like Hoffman's, lingered on the scar. "We'll get you settled in the room above the shop. It's small but comfortable enough." "I'm grateful for your kindness, Aunt Martha." "Family is family," she replied, though her tone suggested the obligation weighed heavily. "Though I should warn you, Cottonwood Springs is a small community. People talk. They always do. Perhaps it would be best if you limited your movements about town until the initial curiosity dies down." Nora understood the implication. Stay hidden, don't embarrass us. She'd become an expert at making herself invisible over the past year. "Of course," she said quietly. "I understand." Martha nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, now I have business to attend to, but Betsy will show you to your room. Tomorrow we'll discuss your duties here at the shop." Nora followed the young shop assistant up narrow stairs to a small room with slanted ceilings and a single window overlooking the dusty main street. The simple iron bedstead, washstand, and battered trunk for her belongings were sparse but clean. "Miss Martha says you're to take your supper up here tonight," Betsy said, her eyes wide with barely contained curiosity. "On account of you being tired from travel." "Thank you, Betsy." After the girl left, Nora sank onto the thin mattress and finally allowed herself a moment of weakness. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Tears had never changed anything. She unpacked her meager belongings: 3 dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a small silver-framed photograph of her parents on their wedding day. She placed the photograph on the bedside table, the sole reminder of happier days. As darkness fell, Nora stood at the window watching the activity on the street below. The saloon across the way was coming alive with raucous laughter and piano music. Men moved in and out of the swinging doors, and women with painted faces and bright dresses loitered nearby. In that moment, the weight of her isolation pressed down upon her. She was 22 years old and already considered ruined, damaged goods, as Edward's society friends had whispered. The man she'd trusted had destroyed her reputation, scarred her body, and abandoned her when she'd needed him most. Now, her only remaining family had taken her in out of obligation, clearly embarrassed by her presence. "You're alive," she whispered to herself. That's more than he wanted. Survival had to be enough for now. Owen Turner adjusted his worn Stetson as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the parched Arizona landscape. His cattle drive had been successful, 20 head delivered to Fort Collins with minimal losses, but the journey back to Cottonwood Springs had been long and solitary. At 30 years old, he'd grown accustomed to his own company, preferring the straightforward challenges of ranching to the complications of town life. His ranch, Sagebrush Valley, lay 10 miles outside Cottonwood Springs, close enough for necessary commerce, but far enough to avoid entanglement in local gossip. Today, however, he needed supplies and had business with Hoffman at the bank. As he guided his chestnut gelding, Rusty, down the main street, he noticed an unusual ripple of activity around Martha Bennett's mercantile. Two women stood outside, their heads bent in fervent conversation, casting frequent glances toward the shop's upper window. Owen paid it little mind. Town gossip held no interest for him. He hitched Rusty outside the general store and strode inside, nodding to Franklin Reed, the proprietor. "Owen Turner, back from your drive, I see," Reed's booming voice carried through the store. "Successful journey." "Can't complain," Owen replied, handing over his supply list. "Need these loaded by midday if possible. Consider it done." Reed's eyes twinkled with subdued excitement. "Heard the news," Owen suppressed a sigh. "What news would that be, Frank?" Martha Bennett's niece arrived yesterday. "From Philadelphia." Reed leaned forward. "They say she's damaged goods, ruined by some wealthy fellow back east who marked her face something terrible." Owen's jaw tightened. He disliked how quickly people were labeled and dismissed in small communities like Cottonwood Springs. "That's so." "Agatha Miller said the girl's face is scarred clean from temple to jaw, and she's been hidden away upstairs since she arrived." Reed shook his head. "Martha's taking a risk, bringing scandal to her doorstep." "Seems to me the real scandal is how quick folks are to condemn a woman they haven't even met," Owen replied, his voice level but firm. Reed had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Just passing along what I heard, Owen. I'd appreciate those supplies by noon." Owen tipped his hat and stepped back into the sunlight, his mood darkened by the conversation. He made his way to the bank, where Hoffman's welcome was as cold as ever. Their business was concluded. Quickly deposit made from the cattle sale, small withdrawal for immediate expenses, and Owen found himself with time to spare before his supplies would be ready. On impulse, he crossed the street to Martha Bennett's mercantile. He needed new shirt studs, he reasoned, though the truth was, Reed's gossip had stirred something in him, a curiosity, perhaps, or more accurately, a sense of injustice at how quickly the town had judged this unknown woman. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Martha herself stood behind the counter, her expression shifting to surprise when she saw him. "Mr. Turner, this is unexpected. What brings you to my establishment today? Need shirt studs, Miss Bennett. Seems I've lost a few." He glanced around the quiet shop. "Business slow today." Martha's lips pursed. "Just momentarily. We've had quite the stream of curious visitors this morning, though few seemed interested in actually purchasing anything." "Imagine that," Owen said dryly. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. "The studs are in that case there. Feel free to look while I finish inventory." As Owen examined the small display of men's accessories, a door at the back of the shop opened, and a young woman emerged carrying a stack of folded linens. His first impression was of grace despite the burden in her arms. She moved with a fluid elegance that spoke of proper upbringing. Her dress was simple but well made, a deep blue that complemented her chestnut hair, which was secured in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. It was only when she turned toward the counter that he saw the scar, a pale line that ran from her right temple down her cheek, ending just above her jawline. The mark did nothing to diminish the intelligence in her hazel eyes or the dignified set of her shoulders. "Where would you like these, Aunt Martha?" she asked, her voice cultured with the faintest Eastern accent. Martha glanced nervously between her niece and Owen. Just there on the counter will do, Nora. Owen noticed how the older woman subtly shifted to partially block her niece from view, as if to shield her or perhaps hide her from his gaze. Mr. Turner was just leaving, Martha added pointedly, but Owen stepped forward, removing his hat. Owen Turner, madam. I own Sagebrush Valley Ranch outside of town. Nora looked momentarily startled by the direct address, as if she'd grown accustomed to being overlooked. Nora Keller, she replied after a slight hesitation. Recently of Philadelphia. Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, Miss Keller. He held her gaze steadily, refusing to look away from the scar or pretend he didn't see it. It's a town with its fair share of faults, but the land around it has its own kind of beauty. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or cautious appreciation crossed her features. Thank you, Mr. Turner, I'm still adjusting. Nora, Martha interrupted. The inventory in the storeroom still needs attention. Owen recognized the dismissal for what it was. Martha Bennett was protecting her niece from town judgment, but also protecting her business from association with scandal. The impulse was understandable if misguided. Of course, Aunt Martha. Nora inclined her head slightly toward Owen. It was a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Turner. Likewise, Miss Keller. As she disappeared into the back room, Owen turned his attention back to Martha, who was watching him with an expression caught between suspicion and warning. I'll take these, he said, selecting a set of silver studs. As Martha wrapped his purchase, he added, Your niece seems a proper lady. She is, Martha replied stiffly, despite what you may have heard. I don't put much stock in gossip, Miss Bennett. Then you're a rarity in Cottonwood Springs, Mr. Turner. She handed him the small package. That will be 75 cents. Owen paid and tucked the package into his vest pocket. Good day, Miss Bennett. As he stepped back onto the boardwalk, Owen found himself dwelling on the brief encounter. Nora Keller's composed demeanor stood in stark contrast to the wild rumors already circulating. Whatever had happened to her in Philadelphia, the woman he'd just met possessed a quiet dignity that impressed him far more than any gossip could diminish. The sun beat down relentlessly as Nora carefully arranged a display of calico fabrics near the front window. It had been 3 weeks since her arrival in Cottonwood Springs, and while the most blatant curiosity had subsided, she remained acutely aware of the whispers that followed her movements. Her aunt had gradually allowed her more visible duties in the store, though always with the instruction to maintain a modest demeanor and avoid unnecessary conversation. The bell above the door jingled, and Nora turned to see Mrs. Westfield enter, trailed by her 2 daughters, Clara and Emily. The Westfields represented the closest thing Cottonwood Springs had to aristocracy, their wealth derived from a successful mining venture, and they were not regular patrons of Martha's mercantile. Good morning, Mrs. Westfield, Nora said, keeping her voice pleasant but restrained as Martha had instructed. How may I assist you today? Mrs. Westfield's gaze slid over Nora with poorly disguised curiosity, lingering on the scar. We're in need of ribbons for the church social. Clara is to perform a piano recital. Congratulations, Miss Clara, Nora said to the elder daughter, who blushed and looked away. The ribbon selection is here, Nora continued, leading them to a glass case displaying colorful spools. We received a new shipment from St. Louis last week, as Mrs. Westfield examined the ribbons. Her younger daughter Emily, no more than 16, stared openly at Nora's face. Emily, her mother hissed. Manners. I'm sorry, the girl said, not sounding particularly contrite. It's just, I heard you were attacked by a jealous rival for your affections. Is that true, Emily? Mrs. Westfield's face reddened. That is entirely inappropriate. Nora kept her expression neutral, though her heart hammered in her chest. No need for concern, Mrs. Westfield. Curiosity is natural. She turned to Emily. I'm afraid the truth is far less dramatic than whatever tales you've heard. Oh, Emily looked disappointed. Lucille Porter said you were caught in a compromising position with a married man and his wife slashed your face with a letter opener. The blood drained from Nora's face. How close to the truth these wild speculations sometimes veered, even as they twisted the reality beyond recognition. "Emily, that is quite enough." Mrs. Westfield's voice had risen to a near shriek. "Go wait outside this instant." As Emily sulked toward the door, the bell jingled again, and Owen Turner stepped into the shop. His tall frame seemed to fill the small space, his presence somehow reassuring amid Nora's distress. "Ladies," he greeted with a tip of his hat. His eyes met Nora's briefly, a silent question in them as he registered her pallor. Mrs. Westfield's demeanor changed instantly, her face arranging itself into a welcoming smile. "Mr. Turner, what a pleasant surprise. I heard your cattle drive was successful." "It was, thank you, Mrs. Westfield." His tone was polite but not encouraging. "Will you be attending the church social this weekend? Clara is performing chop-in." "I hadn't planned on it, madam. Ranch keeps me busy." "Such a shame. It's so important for the community to come together for these events." Mrs. Westfield's eyes darted meaningfully toward Nora. "Though some might be wise to avoid such public gatherings until they've established themselves more appropriately." The insult, thinly veiled as concern, hung in the air between them. Before Nora could respond, Owen spoke, his voice deceptively casual. "I've always found church socials to be excellent opportunities to demonstrate Christian charity and acceptance, Mrs. Westfield. After all, isn't that what our community prides itself on?" Mrs. Westfield's smile tightened. "Indeed, Mr. Turner, though discretion has its place as well." She turned to Nora, her voice cooling considerably. "We'll take the blue ribbon, 3 yards." Nora cut and wrapped the purchase with steady hands, though inside she was trembling with a mixture of humiliation and gratitude for Owen's subtle defense. After the Westfields departed, Owen remained, browsing a shelf of leather goods with no apparent hurry. "Thank you," Nora said quietly when they were alone. "For what you said." He turned, his blue eyes direct and honest. "Nothing that shouldn't have been said long before now." He paused. "You all right?" The simple question, asked without pity or judgment, nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. "I'm fine," she managed. "I've grown accustomed to speculation. Doesn't make it right." He selected a leather belt from the display. "This should do. What do I owe you?" $1.20. As he counted out the money, he asked, "Will you be at the church social?" Nora blinked in surprise. "I hadn't considered it. Might be good to show up. Let folks see you're not hiding." "My aunt thinks it would be better if I kept to myself until the talk dies down." Owen's expression hardened slightly. "With all respect to your aunt, talk doesn't die down when you feed it by hiding away." He placed the coins on the counter. "Just a thought." As he turned to leave, Nora found herself calling after him. "Mr. Turner," he paused at the door, "why are you being kind to me? You don't know anything about me or what happened. Don't need to." His eyes were steady on hers. "Whatever happened back east, it's not who you are now. Out here, we all get the chance to be judged by our own actions, not our pasts." A small smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "At least, that's how it should be." After he left, Nora stood motionless behind the counter, his words echoing in her mind. In Philadelphia, her identity had been irrevocably tied to Edward's betrayal and the subsequent scandal. Her flight west had been driven by a desperate need to escape that definition, yet here she was, allowing herself to be defined by it still, accepting Martha's insistence that she hide away in shame. Perhaps Owen Turner was right. Perhaps the only way forward was to refuse to act ashamed to claim her place in this community on her own terms. When Martha returned from her luncheon with the Ladies' Aid Society, Nora was waiting with uncharacteristic resolve. "Aunt Martha, I've been thinking. I would like to attend the church social this weekend." Martha's face registered alarm. "Nora, dear, it's far too soon. People are still talking." "People will always talk," Nora countered gently. "Hiding away only gives them more reason to speculate." "You don't understand how a town like this works, perhaps not, but I do understand that I cannot live the rest of my life as a recluse because of what happened in Philadelphia." Nora took a deep breath. "I am grateful for everything you've done for me, but I need to find my own way forward." Martha studied her niece's face, seeing perhaps for the first time the determination beneath the composed exterior. This sudden change of heart, it wouldn't have anything to do with Owen Turner's visit, would it? Mr. Turner simply reminded me that I have a choice in how I respond to others' judgments. Martha sighed, removing her hat and gloves with deliberate movements. Owen Turner is a good man, in many ways honest, hardworking, but he's a loner with little regard for social conventions. Not the sort of influence a young woman in your situation should court. I assure you, there's no courting involved, Nora replied, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. But his perspective gave me pause for thought. Martha's expression softened slightly. I only want to protect you, Nora. This town can be unforgiving. I know, and I appreciate your concern, but I cannot hide forever. After a long moment, Martha nodded. Very well, we shall attend the social together. But, she added with warning in her tone, you must promise to conduct yourself with absolute propriety. No conversations with unmarried men without chaperones, no lingering in secluded areas, and certainly no dancing. The restrictions stung, but Nora recognized them as a compromise. I understand. Thank you, Aunt Martha. As she returned to her duties, Nora felt a small flutter of both anticipation and dread. The church social would be her first true test in Cottonwood Springs society, a chance to begin redefining herself beyond the whispers and speculation. Whether the community would allow her that chance remained to be seen. The church social was held in the open area behind the whitewashed Baptist church, where tables had been arranged beneath a canopy of cottonwood trees. Colorful bunting hung from branches, and lanterns would provide light as evening approached. When Nora arrived with her aunt, the gathering was already lively with conversation and the sound of children playing nearby. Nora had chosen her best dress for the occasion, a modest lavender gown with a high collar and long sleeves despite the warm weather. She'd arranged her hair carefully to partially obscure her scarred cheek, though the mark remained visible enough that pretending it didn't exist would be futile. Their arrival caused a brief lull in conversation, followed by a renewed buzz of whispers. Reverend Adams approached immediately, his wife at his side. Martha, Miss Keller, how wonderful that you could join us today. His smile seemed genuine enough, though his eyes, like everyone else's, couldn't help but flicker to her scar. Thank you for the warm welcome, Reverend, Nora replied, determined to match his cordiality. Clara Westfield will be performing shortly, Mrs. Adams added. And the ladies have outdone themselves with the refreshments. Please, help yourselves. As they moved toward the refreshment table, Nora was acutely aware of the space that seemed to form around them, not outright ostracism, but a subtle distancing that spoke volumes. Several women nodded politely but quickly resumed conversations with their companions. Men tipped their hats but made no attempt to engage. Perhaps this wasn't such a good idea, Martha murmured, her smile fixed rigidly in place. It's early yet, Nora replied, though her confidence was wavering. They found seats at the edge of the gathering as Clara Westfield took her place at the upright piano that had been carefully transported outside for the occasion. The girl played competently, if not brilliantly, and polite applause followed her rendition of Chopin. As the musical portion of the social continued, Nora sat quietly beside her aunt, trying to appear at ease despite her growing discomfort. No one approached them except for Reverend Adams's wife, who dutifully made a brief appearance to ensure they had refreshments. It was during a lull between performances that Nora noticed Owen Turner's arrival. Unlike the rest of the men present, who wore their Sunday best, Owen had made only minimal concessions to the occasion, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean shirt and vest, his Stetson brushed free of dust. He nodded to several people but, like Nora, seemed to exist somewhat apart from the main social circles. Their eyes met across the gathering, and he tipped his hat slightly in acknowledgement. To Nora's surprise, instead of maintaining a polite distance as everyone else had, he began making his way directly toward them. Martha tensed beside her. Remember what we discussed, Nora. Good afternoon, Miss Bennet, Miss Keller. Owen's voice was as steady and unaffected as ever. Fine day for a gathering, Indeed, Mr. Turner, Martha replied with cool politeness. Though I must say we're surprised to see you. You're not known for attending these functions. Thought I'd make an exception. His gaze shifted to Nora. Miss Keller, I'm glad to see you decided to come. Thank you, Mr. Turner. It seemed important to be here. A commotion near the refreshment table drew their attention. Mrs. Westfield was gesturing animatedly while speaking to a cluster of women, her voice carrying just enough for fragments to reach them. Entirely inappropriate. Setting a poor example, standards of decency. Though Nora's name wasn't spoken aloud, the direction of Mrs. Westfield's gaze made it clear who was the subject of her disapproval. Martha rose stiffly. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Turner, I believe it's time we took our leave. Aunt Martha, please, Nora whispered, mortified. Let's not draw more attention by departing early. I won't sit here while that woman slanders you publicly. Owen stepped closer, his voice low. Miss Bennet, with respect, leaving now only gives weight to gossip. Miss Keller deserves the chance to stand her ground. Martha hesitated, torn between social instinct and Owen's logic. I have a suggestion, Owen continued. The next portion of the program is group singing, followed by some informal socializing. Why don't I escort you both to join the choir? Standing together with others singing hymns might be the perfect way to ease certain tensions. Nora was touched by his unexpected diplomacy. That's very thoughtful, Mr. Turner. I suppose that would be acceptable, Martha conceded reluctantly. Though I must insist on propriety at all times. Wouldn't have it any other way, madam. As they moved toward the gathering forming near the piano, Owen positioned himself slightly ahead of them, effectively creating a path through the crowd. Nora noticed how people stepped aside for him not out of fear, but with a kind of respectful deference that suggested Owen Turner, for all his apparent isolation, commanded a certain standing in the community. They joined the outer edge of the group just as Reverend Adams announced the first hymn. Song sheets were distributed, and as the piano introduction began, voices rose in "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." Nora sang quietly at first, conscious of the curious glances still cast her way. But as the familiar melody continued, she found herself drawing strength from the simple act of participating in this community ritual. During the third hymn, she became aware of Owen's voice beside her, a pleasant baritone that carried the tune with surprising musicality. When she glanced up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, not pity, certainly, but something warmer that made her heart beat a little faster. By the end of the singing, a subtle shift had occurred. Though no one had directly approached Nora, the wall of isolation seemed slightly less impenetrable. A few women nodded more warmly as the group dispersed, and Reverend Adams made a point of thanking them for joining the choir. That went well, Owen observed as they made their way back toward their original seats. It was better than I expected, Nora admitted. Thank you for your suggestion. Sometimes people just need to remember we're all the same when it comes to faith and community, he replied. He turned to Martha. Miss Bennet, would you object if I asked your niece to take a brief walk around the churchyard, fully visible to all, of course? Martha frowned. I'm not certain that would be appropriate, Mr. Turner. Please, Aunt Martha, Nora said, surprising herself with her boldness. Just a short walk. We'll remain in sight the entire time. After a moment's hesitation, Martha nodded stiffly. Very well, but only around the perimeter of the social where I can see you. As they strolled away, Nora felt a small thrill of liberation. It was the first time since her arrival in Cottonwood Springs that she'd been permitted any interaction without her aunt's direct supervision. Thank you, she said once they were out of earshot. Not just for this, but for earlier encouraging me to attend and then helping make it more bearable. You're doing all the hard work, Owen replied. Standing up to those stares and whispers takes more courage than most men show facing down a charging bull. Nora smiled despite herself. A colorful comparison, Mr. Turner. Call me Owen. His voice softened. If you don't mind me saying so, you have a beautiful smile, one that's been hidden away too much since you arrived. Heat rose to her cheeks. You're very direct. Life's too short for dancing around truths. He guided them along the edge of the gathering, maintaining a respectable distance between them even as his presence felt like a shield against the curious stares. "May I ask you something, Miss Keller?" "Nora, please. And yes, you may. What do you want from your life here in Cottonwood Springs?" The question caught her off guard with its simplicity and depth. "I haven't thought beyond surviving each day," she admitted. "When I left Philadelphia, I was simply running away. I haven't considered what I might be running toward." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "That's honest." Most folks would have a practiced answer about new beginnings and frontier opportunities. "I've had enough of pretense to last a lifetime," Nora replied, more bitterly than she'd intended. They walked in silence for a moment before Owen spoke again. "Whatever happened back east, and I'm not asking you to share it doesn't define who you are out here. The West has a way of stripping things down to essentials. Who you are is what you do, how you treat others, the choices you make now." "Is that why you came west?" Nora asked, curious about this man who seemed so different from the others in town. A shadow crossed his features. "Something like that. Lost my family in '65. Yellow fever took them while I was away fighting. Came west afterward because there wasn't much left for me back in Missouri." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Found something out here I never expected, a kind of peace in the land itself. It doesn't ask questions or pass judgment, just demands honest work and respect." Nora followed his gaze to the rugged landscape beyond the town. "It is beautiful in a wild sort of way, different from anything I knew in Philadelphia." "That's what I thought when I first saw you," Owen said, then immediately looked as if he regretted the words. "I apologize." "That was too forward." "No," Nora replied, touched by his genuine discomfort. "It wasn't, it was kind." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Nora felt something shift between them, a connection that went beyond mere friendliness or charity toward an outcast. The moment was broken by Martha's approach, her expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Nora, it's time we returned home. The evening air is growing cool." Owen stepped back respectfully. "Of course, Miss Bennet. Thank you for allowing me to escort your niece, Mr. Turner." Martha nodded stiffly. "Nora, come along." As Nora moved to follow her aunt, Owen spoke quietly. "Miss Keller, Nora, would you permit me to call on you at the Mercantile sometime this week?" Before she could respond, Martha interjected. "Mr. Turner, while I appreciate your courtesy toward my niece today, I must remind you that Nora is here to recover from difficult circumstances, not to entertain callers." "Aunt Martha," Nora began, but Owen raised a hand. "I understand your concerns, Miss Bennet. But with all due respect, your niece is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions." His eyes found Nora's again. "The invitation stands if you're willing." In that moment, Nora felt the weight of a choice before her continue allowing others to dictate her life out of fear and shame, or begin reclaiming her own agency, whatever the consequences. "I would welcome your call, Mr. Turner," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Perhaps Wednesday afternoon." Martha's lips thinned to a disapproving line, but she said nothing. Owen nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Wednesday it is. Good evening, ladies." As they walked away, Martha remained ominously silent until they'd left the church grounds. Then she turned to Nora, her expression severe. "I hope you understand what you're doing, Nora. A man like Owen Turner may seem appealing in his forthrightness, but he's not the kind of connection that will help restore your reputation." "Perhaps I'm less concerned with restoring my reputation than with building a life I can actually bear to live," Nora replied, the words emerging with a conviction that surprised even her. Martha stopped walking, studying her niece with new eyes. "You've changed since you arrived." "I'm not certain it's for the better." "I'm finding my way, Aunt Martha. Isn't that why I came west? For a new beginning." "A respectable new beginning," Martha corrected, "not further scandal. There's nothing scandalous about Mr. Turner's interest in calling on me." "It's not his interest that concerns me as much as yours," Martha said pointedly. "I've seen how you look at him. After what happened with Edward Blackstone." "Owen Turner is nothing like Edward," Nora interrupted, her voice sharp with sudden anger. And I am not the same naive girl who trusted Edward either. Martha sighed, her expression softening slightly. I only want to protect you, Nora. You've suffered enough. I know, Nora replied more gently, and I'm grateful, but at some point I have to start living again, not just existing. Today at the social was the first time since I arrived that I felt seen, not just stared at, but truly seen. They continued walking in silence, the tension between them unresolved but somehow less fraught. As they reached the mercantile, Martha paused with her hand on the door. Wednesday afternoon, she said finally, but I will be present for the entire visit. It wasn't perfect, but it was a concession. Nora nodded, hiding the small surge of triumph she felt. Thank you, Aunt Martha. That night, as she prepared for bed in her small room above the shop, Nora found herself standing before the small mirror on her washstand. For the first time in months, she looked directly at her reflection, at the scar that cut across her cheek like a pale lightning bolt. It would never fade completely. She would carry this mark of Edward's cruelty for the rest of her life. But today, Owen Turner had looked at her face and seen something else, something worth his attention and respect. And in his eyes, Nora had glimpsed a possibility she'd thought forever lost to her. The chance to be valued not despite her damage, but as a whole person, scars and all. She touched the raised line of tissue gently. Maybe, she whispered to her reflection, maybe we can begin again. In the days leading up to Wednesday, Nora found herself distracted by thoughts of Owen Turner. As she assisted customers, arranged inventory, and helped with the store's bookkeeping, her mind repeatedly drifted to their conversation at the church social, to the way he'd looked at her without flinching from her scar, the genuine interest in his questions, the surprising vulnerability when he'd mentioned his own past. Martha noticed her niece's preoccupation and redoubled her warnings about becoming too invested in Owen's attention. Men like that, independent, set in their ways, they don't make suitable partners for women in need of security and respectability, she cautioned while they took inventory of a new shipment of fabrics. You speak as if he's proposed marriage, Nora replied, trying to keep her tone light. He's merely calling to continue our acquaintance. I've seen the way your face brightens when his name is mentioned, Martha said shrewdly. Be careful with your heart, Nora. It's already been broken once. Shattered is more accurate, Nora murmured. But that doesn't mean I should lock it away forever. Wednesday arrived with clear skies and a dry heat that had the townspeople moving languidly along the boardwalks, seeking whatever shade they could find. At precisely 3 o'clock, the bell above the shop door jingled and Owen stepped inside, hat in hand. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was crisp, his hair freshly trimmed, and he carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Good afternoon, miss. Bennett, he said, nodding to Martha, who stood like a sentinel behind the counter. Miss Keller. Mr. Turner, Nora responded, conscious of the warmth rising to her cheeks. Welcome. I've prepared tea in the sitting room behind the shop, Martha announced. We can converse there with appropriate privacy while still maintaining propriety. Owen's mouth twitched with the hint of a smile. Sounds perfect. The sitting room was small but neatly appointed, with a settee and 2 armchairs arranged around a low table. Martha had laid out her best china and a plate of sugar cookies that Nora had baked that morning. As they settled, Martha ensuring that Owen took one armchair while Nora sat on the settee, an awkward silence descended. I brought something for you, Miss Keller, Owen said, extending the package. Nothing extravagant, just a token I thought might interest you. Under Martha's watchful eye, Nora unwrapped the gift to reveal a slim volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Oh, she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. This is wonderful. I adore poetry, but I left most of my books behind when I came west. The traveling bookseller came through last month, Owen explained. I remembered you mentioned an interest in literature during our walk. You have an excellent memory, Mr. Turner, Nora said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of his gift. Please call me Owen, at least when we're not in public. Martha cleared her throat. Tea, Mr. Turner. The next hour passed in carefully navigated conversation. Martha remained vigilant, redirecting any topics that veered toward the personal. while Owen displayed unexpected patience with her interventions. He spoke of his ranch 600 acres with a natural spring that made it more valuable than most in the territory, and asked polite questions about the mercantile business. When there was a lull, Nora gathered her courage. "I've been thinking about what you asked at the social about what I want from my life here." She felt Martha tense beside her but continued. "I think I'd like to teach. Before everything happened, I was training to become a teacher in Philadelphia." Owen's eyes lit with interest. "Cottonwood Springs could use a proper school teacher. The children currently meet 3 days a week in the church with Reverend Adams's wife, but she's the first to admit she's not adequately trained." "That's hardly a suitable position for someone in Nora's circumstances," Martha interjected. "The school board would never approve." "They might," Owen countered, "if the suggestion came with support from prominent members of the community." Nora looked at him in surprise. "Would you really help me with something like that?" "I would." His gaze was steady. "You're educated and capable. The children would benefit from proper instruction." "It's out of the question," Martha said firmly. "At least for now. Perhaps in a year or two when things have settled." "A year or two of hiding away won't change people's minds, Miss Bennett," Owen said quietly. "Only seeing Nora contribute to the community will do that." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Turner, but I believe I know what's best for my niece." An uncomfortable silence fell. Nora searched for a way to ease the tension when the bell from the shop front jangled insistently. "I should see to that," Martha said, rising. "Excuse me for a moment. Nora, perhaps you could clear the tea things." As soon as Martha disappeared, Owen leaned forward. "I apologize if I overstepped. Your aunt is protective, and I respect that." "She means well," Nora replied, gathering cups onto the tray. "But sometimes I feel as if I've traded one prison for another. In Philadelphia, I was trapped by scandal. Here, I'm trapped by the fear of it." "What happened there?" Owen asked gently. "I'm not asking out of idle curiosity, I just want to understand what you're facing." Nora hesitated. No one in Cottonwood Springs knew the full truth, not even Martha, who had only received the barest outline in her brother's letter requesting sanctuary for his daughter. "You don't have to tell me," Owen added quickly. "I shouldn't have asked." "No, it's all right." Nora set down the tray, her decision made. If she couldn't trust this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, then perhaps she truly was destined for a life of isolation. "Edward Blackstone was engaged to my dear friend Caroline. He was from one of Philadelphia's oldest families, wealthy, charming, and by all appearances, devoted to her." She touched her scar unconsciously. "He began pursuing me in secret while still engaged to Caroline. At first I resisted, but he was persistent. Claimed he'd only proposed to her because of family pressure, that I was the one who truly held his heart." Owen's expression remained neutral, free of judgment. "Eventually I yielded." Shame colored her voice. "We met in secret for months. I convinced myself it was true love, that he would break his engagement and we would marry. Then Caroline discovered one of his letters to me." Nora's hands trembled slightly as she continued. "She was devastated, naturally. When confronted, Edward denied everything, claimed I had pursued him, that I had fabricated the relationship out of jealousy and obsession. His family backed him completely. Caroline's family demanded satisfaction for the insult to their daughter's honor. And no one believed your side." "Why would they? The Blackstones had influence and wealth. I was merely the daughter of a moderately successful merchant." Nora took a steadying breath. "One night, Edward came to me drunk and enraged that I had ruined everything. He said if he couldn't have me, he would ensure no man ever would." Her fingers traced the path of her scar. "He had a penknife. I was lucky a servant heard my screams and intervened before he could do worse. But by then, the damage was done. To my face, to my reputation, to everything." "He wasn't charged?" Owen asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "His family claimed I attacked him first, that he acted in self-defense. They paid the servant to corroborate their story." Nora gave a bitter laugh. "In the end, I was the one ostracized, branded as damaged goods, a scarred temptress who had tried to steal another woman's fiancé." "So you came west?" My father arranged it with Aunt Martha. He thought distance would allow the scandal to fade, give me a chance at a fresh start. She looked up, meeting Owen's gaze directly. But scars don't fade, do they? They just become part of who you are. Owen was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. Now you understand why my aunt is so protective and why the townspeople's whispers cut so deeply. In their eyes, I'm exactly what Edward claimed, damaged, untrustworthy, ruined. In my eyes, Owen said, you're a survivor, someone who endured cruelty and betrayal but still has the courage to seek a new life. He leaned forward, his blue eyes fierce with conviction. Edward Blackstone tried to mark you as damaged goods, Nora, but all I see is a woman of remarkable strength. Something shifted in Nora's chest, a loosening of the tight knot of shame she'd carried since Philadelphia. Before she could respond, Martha returned, her expression troubled. That was Mrs. Westfield, she announced. Apparently, there's been talk about Mr. Turner's visit here today. She came to express concern about the propriety of such an arrangement. Owen stood immediately. Then I should take my leave. I have no wish to cause additional difficulties for either of you. That would be best, Martha agreed, though her tone had softened slightly. Perhaps she'd overheard part of their conversation. At the shop door, Owen turned to Nora. Thank you for the tea and for our conversation. It meant a great deal to me. And to me, Nora replied, aware of Martha hovering nearby. Thank you for the book, I shall treasure it. Perhaps, he said carefully, I might call again. With your aunt's permission, of course. Before Martha could object, Nora spoke firmly. I would like that very much. Perhaps next time you might show me your ranch, with appropriate chaperonage, she added, glancing at her aunt. Martha's lips thinned, but after a moment she sighed. I suppose a brief visit could be arranged, provided I accompany you. Owen's smile was warm with genuine pleasure. I'd be honored to show you Sagebrush Valley. Sunday after church. Sunday would be perfect, Nora agreed. After Owen left, Martha turned to her niece with an expression caught between resignation and concern. You've developed genuine feelings for him. It wasn't a question, and Nora saw no point in denial. I have. Oh, Nora, Martha sighed. I feared this would happen. The first man to show you kindness after Edward. It's not like that, Nora interrupted. Owen is nothing like Edward. He's honest and direct where Edward was manipulative. He sees me the real me, not just a conquest or a pretty face. Pretty faces can be deceiving, Martha cautioned. As you well learned. I know the difference now, Nora insisted. I'm not the naive girl I was in Philadelphia. Martha studied her niece's determined expression. Very well, we'll visit his ranch on Sunday, but please, Nora, proceed with caution. I couldn't bear to see you hurt again. Nor could I, Nora admitted softly, but living in fear of pain isn't really living at all, is it? For the first time since Nora's arrival, Martha's expression held a glimmer of genuine understanding. No, she conceded, I suppose it isn't. The following Sunday dawned clear and bright, with just enough breeze to temper the August heat. After church services, where Nora noted with satisfaction that fewer people seemed to be avoiding her, Owen met them outside with a wagon. Ladies, he greeted them, helping Martha up to the bench seat before turning to offer his hand to Nora. Their fingers touched briefly, sending a small thrill through her that had nothing to do with the summer warmth. The journey to Sagebrush Valley took just under an hour, during which Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory's early days. As they crested a final hill, the ranch spread before them, a sprawling expanse of grassland dotted with cattle, bordered by distant mountains and bisected by a creek lined with cottonwoods. It's beautiful, Nora breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. Home, Owen said simply. Not grand like some of the eastern estates, but it's mine. The ranch house was modest, but well-built, a two-story structure of timber and stone with a wide porch and carefully tended flower beds that surprised Nora. The flowers were my mother's idea, Owen explained as he helped them down from the wagon. She always said a house needs something beautiful to make it a home. After she passed, I kept them going, seemed right somehow. The simple sentiment touched Nora deeply. This was a man who honored memory through action, not just words. Inside, the house was neat and functional, with sturdy furniture and a few unexpected touches of refinement: a well-stocked bookshelf, a decent piano in the corner of the main room, and framed landscapes on the walls. "You play?" Nora asked, gesturing to the piano. "Badly," Owen admitted with a smile. "My mother taught music back in Missouri. She insisted I learn, though I never had her talent. Now it mostly sits silent." "Nora is quite accomplished," Martha offered unexpectedly. "She studied at the Philadelphia Conservatory for Young Ladies before." She trailed off, but Owen picked up smoothly. "Then perhaps you'd honor me with a piece, after we've had refreshments, of course." The next few hours passed in a pleasant haze for Nora. Owen showed them around the property, introduced them to his foreman, a grizzled older man named Hank, who tipped his hat respectfully to the ladies, and served a simple but delicious meal that he admitted had been prepared by his housekeeper, Mrs. Donovan, who came in 3 times a week from town. "Bachelor cooking isn't fit for company," he said with a self-deprecating smile. After the meal, Martha surprised Nora by suggesting she play the piano while Martha herself rested on the porch. "The heat tires me," she explained. "But I can see you clearly through the window, so propriety will be maintained." Left alone with Owen in the main room, Nora felt suddenly shy as she settled at the piano bench. "It's been some time since I played for anyone," she admitted. "Play whatever brings you joy," he suggested, taking a seat in a nearby armchair. Nora chose a Chopin nocturne, one of her favorites from her conservatory days. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt the familiar release that music had always provided: a temporary escape from worldly concerns into pure emotion and beauty. When the final notes faded, she looked up to find Owen watching her with an expression of quiet wonder. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you for sharing it." "It feels good to play again," she admitted. "I haven't touched a piano since leaving Philadelphia." "Music reveals the soul," Owen observed. "Yours is luminous." The compliment, so unexpected and sincere, brought warmth to her cheeks. "You're kind to say so." "Not kind. Honest." He moved to stand beside the piano, close enough that Nora could see the sunlight catching the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "Nora, I know we've known each other only a short time, but I find myself thinking of you constantly." Her heart stuttered. "Owen, please, let me finish before my courage fails me. I'm not a man of fancy words or social graces. I live a simple life out here, far from the refinements you knew in the East, but it's a good life, an honest one." He took a deep breath. "I care for you deeply. Your strength, your dignity in the face of cruelty, your gentle heart, they've captured mine completely." "Owen, I'm not asking for promises," he continued quickly. "I know you've been hurt, betrayed in the worst way. I only ask that you allow me to court you properly, with your aunt's blessing if possible, to show you that not all men are like Edward Blackstone." Nora's fingers rested silently on the piano keys as emotion welled within her. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Owen urged gently. "That's all I ask for now." She looked up at him, this man who had seen beyond her scar to the person beneath, who had defended her when others whispered, who had encouraged her to reclaim her own strength rather than hide away in shame. "I don't need to consider it," she said softly. "My answer is yes." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Truly, truly," she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "But I should warn you, courting damaged goods won't be easy. The town will talk." Owen's expression turned serious. "Let me tell you something, Nora Keller. When I look at you, I don't see damaged goods. I see a woman who's weathered a storm and emerged stronger. If there are broken pieces, then I'll take each one as precious because they're part of you." Tears filled her eyes at his words. "How do you always know exactly what I need to hear?" "Not always," he admitted with a small smile. "But in this, I speak only truth." From the porch, Martha cleared her throat loudly, a reminder of her presence and role as chaperone. Owen stepped back respectfully just as she appeared in the doorway. "It's growing late," she announced. "We should begin our return journey if we're to reach town before dusk." "Of course, Miss Bennet." Owen's voice was steady, though his eyes still held the warmth of their exchange. "I'll prepare the wagon." As he stepped outside, Martha gave her niece a knowing look. "I heard enough to gather his intentions. Are you certain this is wise, Nora?" "No," Nora admitted honestly, "but for the first time since Philadelphia, I'm willing to risk my heart again." "That must count for something," Martha's expression softened. "It counts for everything, my dear." She patted Nora's hand. "And for what it's worth, I believe Owen Turner to be a man of genuine character, different from what I would have chosen for you, perhaps, but honorable in his way." Coming from Martha, this was high praise indeed. "Thank you, Aunt Martha. Your blessing means more than I can say." The return journey to town was filled with a quiet contentment for Nora. As the wagon rolled along, she found herself noticing details of the landscape she'd missed before the golden quality of the late afternoon light on the grasslands, the graceful swoop of hawks overhead, the distant silhouette of mountains standing sentinel against the sky. The beauty of this rugged country was beginning to work its way into her heart, just as its plain-spoken cowboy had done in town. Owen helped them down from the wagon in front of the mercantile, his hand lingering on Nora's a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I have business in town tomorrow," he said. "Perhaps I might call briefly. We would welcome your visit," Martha answered before Nora could speak. "For tea around 3. Owen's smile was warm with gratitude for her acceptance. "Until tomorrow, then." As they watched him drive away, Martha placed a hand on Nora's shoulder. "You're glowing, my dear. It suits you." Nora turned to her aunt in surprise. "I thought you disapproved." "I was concerned," Martha corrected. "There's a difference, but seeing you together today." "Perhaps this is the new beginning you came west to find." That night, as Nora prepared for bed, she found herself humming the Chopin nocturne she'd played earlier. For the first time since arriving in Cottonwood Springs, perhaps for the first time since Edward's betrayal, she felt genuine hope for her future. Not just survival, but the possibility of joy, of connection, of building something meaningful from the broken pieces of her past. She opened the poetry book Owen had given her, finding comfort in Emily Dickinson's words about hope being the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Tonight, hope had indeed returned to perch in her soul, its wings tentative but strengthening with each beat of her heart. Over the following weeks, Owen courted Nora with a dedication that gradually won over even the most skeptical members of Cottonwood Springs society. He called regularly at the mercantile, always bringing small, thoughtful gifts, wildflowers from the ranch, a carved wooden bird that he'd made himself during long winter evenings, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a storm drain, which quickly became the shop's beloved mouser. More significantly, he openly escorted Nora to church services and community gatherings, his quiet presence beside her a clear statement of his regard. When whispers followed them, he neither became defensive nor withdrew. He simply continued treating Nora with unwavering respect and gentle affection. Gradually, the whispers diminished. Not everyone approved, of course. Mrs. Westfield and her circle maintained their distance, and some of the older men regarded Owen with puzzlement, unable to understand his interest in a compromised woman when there were plenty of untouched girls in the territory. But others began to soften. Clara Westfield, defying her mother's instructions, sought Nora's help with a difficult piano piece. The Reverend's wife invited her to join the church's charity committee. Slowly, Nora found herself being integrated into the community not as an object of scandal, but as a person of value. In early October, an unexpected opportunity arose. Mrs. Adams, who had been attempting to teach the town's children, announced that she was expecting a baby and could no longer manage the school duties. At the town council meeting, Owen, who rarely attended such gatherings, stood up with a proposal. "Miss Keller has formal training as a teacher from one of Philadelphia's finest institutions," he stated to the assembled townspeople. "She's educated, patient with children, and available immediately. I propose we offer her the position, at least on a temporary basis until a permanent arrangement can be made." The suggestion was met with mixed reactions. Mayor Peterson looked thoughtful, while Hoffman from the bank frowned deeply. Mrs. Westfield immediately objected. "Surely we cannot place our children under the influence of a woman with such a..." Questionable background, she declared, casting a pointed glance at Nora's scarred cheek. Nora, who was present with Martha, felt her heart sink despite having anticipated such opposition. To her surprise, it was Martha who spoke next, rising with dignity. If by questionable background, Mrs. Westfield, you refer to the fact that my niece was the victim of a violent attack by a man who then slandered her to protect his own reputation, then yes, her background includes that unfortunate chapter. Martha's voice was steel wrapped in silk. It also includes graduating at the top of her class from the Philadelphia Teachers College and serving as a tutor to some of that city's most prominent families. A murmur ran through the gathering. The children need instruction, Martha continued. Nora is qualified and willing. I would think the practical needs of our community would outweigh baseless gossip. I agree with Miss Bennett, Reverend Adams said, standing to join the discussion. Our Lord teaches us not to judge, and I have observed nothing in Miss Keller's conduct since her arrival that suggests she would be anything but a positive influence on our children. Mayor Peterson nodded slowly. Let's put it to a vote then. All in favor of offering Miss Keller the teaching position on a trial basis of 3 months. Hands raised throughout the room, not everyone, but a clear majority. Nora felt tears prick her eyes as she realized what was happening. This community that had initially shunned her was now offering her a chance to contribute, to use her skills to build a life beyond mere existence. Well, Miss Keller, Mayor Peterson asked, will you accept the position? Nora stood, her voice clear and steady. I would be honored to serve as Cottonwood Springs teacher. I promise to devote myself fully to the education and welfare of your children. Then it's settled, the mayor declared. School will resume next Monday with Miss Keller as teacher. After the meeting, Owen found Nora outside the town hall, his eyes bright with pride. Congratulations, teacher, he said softly. I can hardly believe it, she admitted. When we first discussed this possibility, it seemed impossible. Nothing's impossible for a woman of your determination, he replied, offering his arm to escort her back to the mercantile. I told you that actions speak louder than whispers in these parts. You've shown your character through patience and dignity. People notice such things, even if it takes time. I couldn't have done it without your support, Nora said, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. Or Aunt Martha's. Did you hear her defense of me? I never expected such fierce advocacy. Your aunt loves you, Owen observed. She just shows it in her own way. As they walked through the evening quiet streets, Nora felt a sense of belonging she'd thought forever lost to her. It wasn't just Owen's courtship or the teaching position, it was the gradual realization that she was crafting a life of meaning here in this frontier town, piecing together a future from what had once seemed like irreparable damage. What are you thinking? Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. That perhaps broken things can be rebuilt into something different but equally beautiful, she replied. Like those Japanese pottery pieces repaired with gold to highlight the cracks rather than hide them. Owen's smile was tender. I like that image. The breaks become part of the beauty, not something to be ashamed of. Exactly. She touched her scar lightly. I'm beginning to see that this mark doesn't define me unless I allow it to. You've never been defined by it in my eyes, Owen said quietly. From the first moment, I saw your courage, your intelligence, your gentle heart. The scar is just part of your story, not your whole narrative. They had reached the mercantile, and Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Nora, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, but I've been waiting for the right moment. Her heart quickened. Yes, now that you have the teaching position, you'll need to consider more permanent arrangements. The room above the mercantile was fine for a temporary stay, but as the town's teacher, you should have a proper home. He took a deep breath. I would be honored if you would consider making that home with me as my wife. Though she'd begun to hope for such a proposal, the reality of it still took her breath away. Owen, I love you, Nora Keller, he continued, his blue eyes serious and steady on hers. I love your strength and your gentleness, your passion for learning and your patience with those who have judged you unfairly. I want to build a life with you children if we're blessed with them, but most of all, a partnership of equals, based on respect and deep affection." Tears filled Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Turner." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Mindful of their public location, he didn't embrace her as she knew he wanted to, but he did raise her hand to his lips in a gesture of reverence that moved her deeply. "I should speak with your aunt," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Tomorrow," Nora suggested. "Come for dinner and we'll tell her together." "Tomorrow, then." He squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "Until then, Miss Keller. Until then, Mr. Turner." As she watched him walk away, Nora felt a certainty she had never experienced before, not the naive infatuation she'd felt for Edward, but a deep, grounded confidence in Owen's character and in the future they would build together. A future where her scars, both visible and invisible, would be accepted as part of who she was, not defects to be hidden or apologized for. For the first time since that terrible night in Philadelphia, Nora felt truly whole. The small, whitewashed schoolhouse buzzed with excitement as Nora arranged books and slates on the dozen desks that filled the single room. It was her first day as Cottonwood Springs teacher, and anticipation mingled with nervousness as she prepared to welcome her students. The town's children ranged from 6-year-old Sally Peterson, the mayor's youngest, to 16-year-old Thomas Reed, who would likely attend only until spring planting required his help on his father's farm. In between were a dozen others of various ages and backgrounds, including, surprisingly, Emily Westfield, whose mother had reluctantly conceded that education took precedence over social objections. At precisely 8 o'clock, Nora rang the small hand bell that signaled the start of the school day. The children filed in, some shy, others boldly curious about their new teacher. "Good morning, students," Nora said, smiling warmly. "I'm Miss Keller, and I'm honored to be your new teacher." She saw a few of the younger children stare at her scar, but their natural curiosity was without malice. One small boy, Jimmy Baker, raised his hand immediately. "Yes, Jimmy, did you get hurt, Miss Keller?" he asked with the directness only a 7-year-old could manage. A few of the older children looked embarrassed, but Nora appreciated his honesty. "I did, Jimmy, a long time ago. It left a mark, but it healed and it doesn't hurt anymore." "My pa has a big scar on his arm from the war," Jimmy offered. "He says it's a reminder." "A reminder," Nora corrected gently. "And your father is right. Scars remind us of what we've overcome." She addressed the whole class. "Now, shall we begin our lessons?" The day passed in a blur of activity, assessing each child's level of knowledge, organizing reading groups, establishing classroom rules, and beginning their first geography lesson about the Arizona Territory. By the time the final bell rang, Nora was exhausted but exhilarated. Teaching filled a void in her she hadn't fully recognized until now, the need to contribute, to shape young minds, to pass on knowledge. As the children dispersed, Emily Westfield lingered, approaching Nora's desk with hesitation. "Miss Keller, I wanted to apologize for what I said at the Mercantile that day about the rumors. It was unkind." Nora was touched by the girl's sincerity. "Thank you, Emily, that takes courage. My mother says I shouldn't speak to you unless necessary," Emily admitted, looking down. "But you're a good teacher, better than Mrs. Adams was, and—" She hesitated before continuing in a rush. "I think it's brave how you don't hide your scar or act ashamed, even when people stare." Unexpected emotion tightened Nora's throat. "That means a great deal to me, Emily." The girl nodded awkwardly before hurrying out, leaving Nora to reflect on the day's small victories. If she could reach even one child like Emily, help her see beyond superficial judgments to deeper truths, then perhaps the pain of her past had served some purpose after all. She was still gathering her materials when a knock sounded at the open door. Owen stood there, hat in hand, a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers in his other hand. "For the teacher," he said, crossing the room to present them to her, "on her first day." "They're beautiful," Nora said, burying her face in the blooms to hide the sudden tears that threatened. "Thank you." "How did it go?" He perched on the edge of a student desk. Better than I dared hope, she admitted. The children are eager to learn, and they accepted me without the prejudice adults carry. Children see clearly sometimes when adults are blinded by convention. He reached for her hand. I spoke with your aunt this morning. Nora's heart skipped, and she gave her blessing, though not without extracting promises that I would provide properly for you and respect your continued teaching if that's your wish after marriage. That sounds like Aunt Martha, Nora said with a smile, always practical. She loves you, Owen observed, in her way. I know, and I'm grateful for it, even when her protectiveness feels stifling. Owen squeezed her hand gently. I was thinking, if you're agreeable, perhaps we could be married before winter sets in. The ranch house gets mighty cold and lonely when the snow comes. The thought of sharing winter evenings with Owen beside a crackling fire, perhaps reading aloud or playing the piano while the wind howled outside, filled Nora with quiet joy. I'd like that very much. November, then, that gives us a month to prepare. November would be perfect. She looked around the schoolroom. I can continue teaching afterward. You're sure you wouldn't mind having a wife with her own profession? Mind, I'm proud of you, Nora. Your teaching is a gift to this community, one that was sorely needed. His eyes were warm with admiration. Besides, Sagebrush Valley is close enough that the ride to town isn't burdensome, especially once we get you a proper horse of your own. The casual mention of such a gift, a horse of her own, was typical of Owen's generosity, always offered without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. It was one of countless qualities that had drawn her to him these past months. I love you, she said simply, the words still new enough to fill her with wonder. And I love you, he stood, drawing her up with him. Now, may I escort the town's new school teacher home? People will talk if we linger alone too long. Let them talk, Nora replied with newfound confidence. I'm beyond caring about whispers now. Together they walked from the schoolhouse into the golden light of an October afternoon. As they made their way down the main street, Nora noticed the difference in how people greeted them, no longer with averted gazes or hushed comments, but with genuine nods of acknowledgement and even a few warm smiles. Redemption, she reflected, came in small increments: a child's honest question, a student's apology, a community's gradual acceptance, and most precious of all, the unwavering love of a man who had seen her wholeness when others saw only damage. The November morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect day for a wedding. Nora stood in her room above the mercantile, allowing Martha to make final adjustments to her dress, a simple gown of ivory silk with a high collar and delicate lace at the cuffs, ordered specially from Denver for the occasion. You look beautiful, my dear, Martha said, her usual briskness softened by emotion. Your parents would be so proud to see you today. The mention of her distant parents still in Philadelphia, unable to travel for the ceremony but supportive in their letters, brought a momentary pang to Nora's heart. I wish they could be here. They are in spirit, Martha assured her, adjusting the small wreath of dried autumn flowers that crowned Nora's upswept hair. And they'll visit when travel is easier, I'm sure of it. Nora smiled at her aunt's reflection in the mirror. Thank you, Aunt Martha. Not just for today, but for everything. Taking me in when I had nowhere else to go, defending me to the town. I know it hasn't been easy. Martha's eyes misted over, a rare display of emotion from the normally stoic woman. Family stands together, Nora. And I've come to see that Owen Turner, for all his unconventional ways, is the kind of man who understands that principle down to his bones. He does, Nora agreed softly. He's shown me what love truly means, not possession or control, but acceptance and respect. Then I could ask for nothing more for you. Martha handed her a small velvet box. This was your grandmother's. I thought you might like to wear it today. Inside was a delicate pearl pendant on a silver chain, simple but elegant, much like the woman who had owned it. It's perfect, Nora whispered, allowing Martha to fasten it around her neck. A knock at the door announced Reverend Adams, who would escort Nora to the church in Martha's place. The groom awaits, Miss Keller, he said with a warm smile. And I dare say he's the most nervous man I've seen in my sanctuary in quite some time. Nora laughed, the sound bright with happiness. then we shouldn't keep him waiting. The small church was filled beyond capacity, surprising Nora with the number of townspeople who had come to witness her union with Owen. Not everyone was present, of course, Mrs. Westfield and her circle were conspicuously absent, but far more faces smiled in welcome than she could have imagined on that first difficult day in Cottonwood Springs. Her students occupied the front pews, the girls with flowers in their hair, the boys uncomfortable in starched collars but grinning widely at their teacher. Behind them sat the various shopkeepers, ranchers, and townspeople who had gradually come to accept Nora as one of their own, not through dramatic declarations, but through the daily interactions that formed the fabric of community life. And at the altar, Owen waited, his tall frame uncharacteristically tense with anticipation. He wore a new black suit and had trimmed his hair and beard for the occasion, but it was the expression in his eyes as Nora walked toward him that took her breath away, a look of such profound love and wonder that it seemed to illuminate him from within. Reverend Adams conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth, speaking of marriage as a partnership of equals, a journey undertaken together through all of life's joys and sorrows. When it came time for the vows, Owen's voice rang clear and steady through the church. I, Owen Turner, take you, Nora Keller, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish and respect you, to stand beside you in all circumstances, to honor your strength and independence even as I offer my protection and support. From the first moment I saw you, I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who had faced adversity with courage and grace. I pledge to love every part of you, not despite your scars but including them, for they are part of the remarkable woman who stands before me today. Tears blurred Nora's vision as she responded with her own vows, her voice soft but unwavering. I, Nora Keller, take you, Owen Turner, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love and honor you, to create a home with you built on trust and mutual respect, to face whatever challenges life brings with the same courage and integrity you have shown me. When others saw only damage, you saw possibility. You taught me that broken pieces can be gathered and made into something new and beautiful. I give you my heart, my trust, and my future with gratitude and joy. They exchanged simple gold bands, and Reverend Adams pronounced them husband and wife. Owen's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, mindful of their audience but unmistakably passionate. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, was modest but joyful. The community had contributed to a feast that reflected the frontier's abundance: roast venison, fresh bread, preserved fruits, and a wedding cake baked by the Reverend's wife. Children darted between tables, music played, and conversation flowed as freely as the cider and coffee. As the afternoon lengthened, Owen found Nora in a quiet moment and drew her aside. Ready to go home, Mrs. Turner, the name sent a thrill through her. Home, she repeated, savoring the word. Yes, I think I am. They made their farewells, accepting embraces and well wishes with gratitude. Martha's goodbye was particularly emotional, though she quickly composed herself. You'll come for Sunday dinner regularly, she insisted, a command rather than a question. And I expect to hear about everything at the school. Of course, Aunt Martha, Nora promised, embracing her tightly. Thank you for everything. Owen had prepared a special wagon for their journey to the ranch, freshly painted, with comfortable seats adorned with cushions and a canopy to shield them from the late autumn sun. As they drove away from town amid cheers and thrown flower petals, Nora felt a profound sense of transition, not an ending, but a beginning. Happy? Owen asked, his eyes briefly leaving the road to meet hers. Completely, she assured him, nestling closer to his side. It feels like a dream, one I never dared hope for after Philadelphia. It's real, he said, his arms strong around her shoulders. As real as this land, this life we're building together. As they approached Sagebrush Valley, the setting sun gilded the landscape in amber light, transforming the familiar vista into something magical. Owen guided the wagon up the long drive to the ranch house, where lights glowed welcomingly in the windows. Mrs. Donovan's work, Nora knew, preparing the house for their arrival before tactfully departing. Before Nora could dismount, Owen set the brake and turned to her. "There's a tradition to uphold," he said with a smile, climbing down and coming around to her side. In one fluid motion, he lifted her into his arms. "Owen," she laughed, clinging to his neck. "Is this necessary?" "Absolutely," he affirmed, carrying her up the porch steps. "A man carries his bride across the threshold of their home. It's good luck. And do you think we need luck?" She asked as he managed to open the door without setting her down. His expression turned serious as he stepped inside, still holding her. "No," he said softly. "What we have goes far deeper than luck, Nora, but I'll take any blessing available for this life we're beginning together." He set her gently on her feet in the center of the main room, which had been transformed with fresh flowers and candles. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, warding off the evening chill, and the table was set for two with Owen's best china. "Welcome home," he said simply. Nora turned slowly, taking in the room with new eyes, no longer as a visitor, but as mistress of this house, partner to this man. On the mantel, she spotted a new addition, a framed photograph of her parents that she'd kept in her room above the mercantile, placed carefully beside a similar image of Owen's family. "I thought they should be here," Owen explained, following her gaze. "Part of our new beginning." The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved her deeply. Without words, she went to him, lifting her face for his kiss. This time, with no audience to consider, Owen's embrace held nothing back. His lips claimed hers with a passion that had been carefully restrained during their courtship, and Nora responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as years of caution and fear dissolved in the warmth of absolute trust. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've waited so long to hold you like this," he murmured. "No more waiting," she whispered, her earlier nervousness about the wedding night replaced by certainty. This was Owen, the man who had seen her scars, both visible and hidden, and loved her not despite them, but as an integral part of who she was. Later, as they lay entwined in the large bed that had been Owen's father's before him, Nora traced idle patterns on his chest, marveling at the sense of peace that enveloped her. Their lovemaking had been everything she'd hoped, tender yet passionate, with Owen's characteristic consideration for her comfort and pleasure guiding every touch. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers gently combing through her unbound hair. "That I never imagined feeling this way," she admitted. "After Edward, after what happened, I thought that part of me was broken beyond repair." Owen's arms tightened around her protectively. "Nothing about you is broken, Nora. Wounded, perhaps, but healed stronger at the broken places, like a bone that's been reset properly." She smiled against his skin. "You have a gift for saying exactly what I need to hear, just speaking truth as I see it." He shifted to look into her eyes. "I want you to know something, Nora. I meant what I said in my vows today. I love every part of you, including the experiences that have shaped you. The woman you are now, with all her strength and wisdom and compassion, wouldn't exist without those trials. I'm beginning to understand that," she said softly. "To see that perhaps nothing is truly wasted if we can find meaning in it, even in the painful parts." "Exactly." His smile was tender in the dim lamplight. "Now, Mrs. Turner, I believe I promised to cherish you for all my days. Shall I demonstrate my commitment to that vow again?" Nora's laugh was free of shadows as she welcomed him back into her arms. "I think that would be entirely appropriate, Mr. Turner." 5 years later, Nora stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Owen taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his new pony in the fenced paddock nearby. The boy's delighted squeals carried clearly on the summer air, matched by the babbling of 18-month-old Emma, who was determined to escape her mother's arms and join the excitement. "Patience, little one," Nora soothed, shifting the toddler to her hip. "Your turn will come soon enough." The ranch had prospered under Owen's management, expanding to include additional grazing land and a small orchard that Nora had insisted upon planting. The original house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a dedicated classroom where Nora continued to teach, though now she instructed only their own children and those of neighboring ranchers who rode over 3 times a week for lessons. Her position at the Cottonwood Springs school had lasted until James's birth, at which point she'd reluctantly resigned, finding the daily journey into town too taxing with an infant. The town had expressed genuine regret at losing her services, a far cry from the whispers and suspicion that had greeted her arrival 6 years earlier. Martha still maintained the mercantile, though she now had a young couple helping her manage it, with plans to sell them the business eventually. She doted on her great-niece and nephew, insisting on Sunday dinners whenever possible and spoiling the children shamelessly despite her protestations to the contrary. As for Mrs. Westfield and her circle, they had gradually softened their stance over the years, particularly after Nora organized a successful fundraising effort for a new church roof following a severe storm. Not quite friendship, but a respectful coexistence that suited Nora perfectly. She no longer needed their approval to feel whole. Owen completed the riding lesson and lifted James from the pony, swinging the boy onto his shoulders as they approached the porch. "We have a natural horseman here," he announced proudly. "Takes after his father." "And his mother's stubbornness," Nora added with a smile. "He refused to admit he was tired until the 3rd circuit. Determination, not stubbornness," Owen corrected, setting James down and reaching for Emma, who went to him eagerly. A fine quality in a Turner. Nora's hand drifted unconsciously to her cheek, where the scar remained visible but had faded somewhat with time. These days, she rarely thought about it. It was simply part of her face, her history, her journey to this life she'd built with Owen. "What's on your mind?" Owen asked, noticing the gesture. "I was thinking about damaged goods," she said honestly, his eyebrows lifted in surprise. "That's a phrase I haven't heard in a long time." "I was remembering how people used to whisper it when I first came to Cottonwood Springs. How I believed it myself in many ways." She looked at their children, James now chasing a butterfly across the yard, Emma secure in her father's arms, and then at Owen, her partner in everything that mattered. "I couldn't see then what you saw. And what was that?" He asked, though his eyes told her he already knew. "Possibility," she said simply. "The chance to build something beautiful from broken pieces." Owen shifted Emma to one arm so he could wrap the other around Nora, drawing her against his side. "I'd say we've done exactly that, Mrs. Turner. And I wouldn't change a single piece of our story." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the landscape in gold and amber, Nora leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the family they'd created together. From scarred outcast to beloved wife, mother, and respected community member, her journey had been neither easy nor expected. But standing here now, she wouldn't have changed it either. Every broken piece had indeed been gathered, treasured, and transformed into something far more precious than she could have imagined on that first day in Cottonwood Springs, when whispers followed her scarred face, and she believed herself beyond redemption. "Neither would I," she said softly, lifting her face for Owen's kiss. "Neither would I.